The champagne glass slipped from my fingers before I realized I had let it go. It hit the marble floor and shattered, and for one strange second, every person in that ballroom went completely silent. 500 guests. Crystal chandeliers. White roses on every table. The most beautiful room I had ever stood in. And my husband was walking toward the microphone. My name is Elena Vale. 20 minutes ago, I was a bride. I had stood at that altar with my heart so full I could barely breathe, and Conrad had smiled at me, and I had believed with everything I had that this was real. Something safe. Something mine. I should have studied Vivian more carefully during the ceremony. Conrad's mother had sat in the front row in deep burgundy silk, watching the whole thing with eyes that never warmed, not even once. Not when Conrad said his vows. Not when the guests clapped. She simply watched, patient and still, like someone waiting for exactly the right moment to pull a pin from a grenade. That moment arrived during the reception toast. Conrad cleared his throat. The microphone screeched. The room hushed. "I have something I need to say," he began. And the world I had built came apart in the next 30 seconds. "This marriage," Conrad said, his voice perfectly calm, "was a contractual obligation. Nothing more." I heard the words. I understood each one. But my brain refused to put them together in a way that made sense. I stood in my wedding dress, holding the stem of a now empty champagne flute, while 500 people stared at me, waiting. Vivian stepped up beside her son. She adjusted the microphone slightly, like she had rehearsed this part. Maybe she had. "We allowed this girl into our family out of charity," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "Let us not pretend she belongs here." Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. People were pulling out their phones. Security guards were moving along the edge of the room, working their way toward me, the bride, at her own reception. I turned to find my father. He was staring at the ceiling like something fascinating was happening up there. My mother caught my eye and mouthed 2 words quietly enough that only I could read them. "Just leave." I looked down at the shattered glass on the marble floor. 100 tiny pieces catching the light. That was the last clear image I carried from my wedding night. Everything after that feels like trying to remember a dream while standing in the dark. My childhood home was 20 minutes away. I drove there myself, still in the gown, hands tight on the steering wheel, city lights smearing past the windows. I was not crying. I was too far past shock for tears. Everything inside me had gone cold and still. I rang the bell twice. My mother opened the door just wide enough to see my face, then glanced up and down the street like she was checking for neighbors. "You embarrassed us," she said. "Mom, I didn't know." My voice came out small. I had no idea he was going to do that. "I didn't plan any of this. Keep your voice down." My father's voice carried from somewhere inside the house. "We cannot be connected to this scandal. Not now." My mother looked at me one final time. Whatever she was feeling, she had locked it somewhere I could not reach. There was no trace of the woman who used to braid my hair before school or leave notes in my lunchbox. The door closed. The lock clicked. I sat on the porch steps in my wedding dress. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the tears came, slow at first, then all at once, and I let them come, because there was nobody left to tell me not to. By morning, I was a trending topic. I found out while sitting on a cold bus stop bench near my parents' house. My phone almost dead, but alive just long enough to show the flood of notifications. Hundreds. Then thousands. Someone had filmed everything. Conrad's voice played out of tiny phone speakers all across the internet. Vivian's smile was frozen in screenshots. The security guards. Me, standing there like a statue, completely still. The headlines were the kind that cut clean and fast. Gold digger bride exposed at her own reception. Elite family kicks out social climber. Billionaire's son ends sham marriage in front of 500 guests. People who had not spoken to me in years shared the video with laughing emojis. Former friends unfollowed me one by one, like dominoes falling in slow motion. I opened my banking app. The joint account Conrad had added me to 3 weeks before the wedding showed a zero balance. Access revoked. The timestamp showed he had done it at midnight, while I was still sitting on my parents' porch. My hands went still on the screen. I counted backward through the past 6 months. Every conversation. Every signed document. Every carefully timed event. This was not a reaction. This had been designed. Every single piece of it. I had $43 in my personal account. I walked to the nearest hotel I could find. It was clean and close, and that was all I needed. I stood at the front desk in yesterday's wedding dress with my card and what was left of my dignity. The card declined. The receptionist recognized me. I watched it happen, her eyes dropping to the dress, coming back up to my face, something shifting in her expression. Behind me, 2 people near the lobby chairs raised their phones. I picked up my bag. I did not know where I was going, but I was leaving with my head up. Then a voice came from directly behind me. Put it on my account. A tall man in a dark suit was already sliding a black card across the desk. He did not look at me with pity. He did not look at me like entertainment. He looked at me like I was a person who needed a room. Public cruelty fascinates me, he said quietly. Especially when it is this carefully organized. I searched his face for something. An angle, a motive, the thing people always want when they do something generous for a stranger. I found nothing except calm attention. His name, I learned moments later, was Alexander Laurent. 6. He did not ask questions in the lobby. He arranged the room, spoke briefly to the staff, then turned to me. The suite is yours for as long as you need it, he said. I will not bother you tonight. I wanted to ask why, but I was so exhausted my legs were shaking, and the only thing I could manage was a nod. The room was warm and quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at myself in the mirror. A woman in a ruined wedding dress. Dried mascara on her cheeks. Flowers still pinned in her hair because she had forgotten they were there. I pulled them out one by one and dropped them onto the carpet. I had spent 6 months planning that wedding. Every flower, every song, every word of my vows. I had written those vows meaning every single word. And Conrad had stood at the same altar practicing a completely different speech, one designed to erase me in front of everyone I had ever known. I needed to sleep. I needed to think clearly. Something in my bones was already telling me that what happened in that ballroom was not an ending. It was the beginning of a much bigger truth. The next morning, 3 quiet knocks at the suite door. I opened it. A staff member stood with a breakfast tray. Behind him, at a polite distance, was Alexander Laurent. 10 minutes, he said. I have something you need to see. The room was warm and quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at myself in the mirror. A woman in a ruined wedding dress. Dried mascara on her cheeks. Flowers still pinned in her hair because she had forgotten they were there. I pulled them out one by one and dropped them onto the carpet. I had spent 6 months planning that wedding. Every flower, every song, every word of my vows. I had written those vows meaning every single word. And Conrad had stood at the same altar practicing a completely different speech, one designed to erase me in front of everyone I had ever known. I needed to sleep. I needed to think clearly. Something in my bones was already telling me that what happened in that ballroom was not an ending. It was the beginning of a much bigger truth. The next morning, 3 quiet knocks at the suite door. I opened it. A staff member stood with a breakfast tray. Behind him, at a polite distance, was Alexander Laurent. 10 minutes, he said. I have something you need to see. He sat in the chair across from the sofa and placed a folder on the coffee table. He did not open it immediately. I will be direct, he said. Your marriage to Conrad was not random. His family selected you. Specifically. He opened the folder and slid it toward me. Documents. Financial transfers. My grandmother's name at the top of the first page. Your late grandmother left behind an estate, he continued. Most people believed it was modest. It was not. Hidden inside its legal structure are silent shares, a significant portion, in Conrad's family company. Your grandmother tied those shares to an inheritance clause designed to protect her bloodline. He let me read for a moment. Conrad's family needed you legally married to him to access a loophole in that clause and take temporary control of the shares. The plan was always to humiliate you publicly and push you into signing away your rights under emotional pressure. I looked at the documents, then back at him. The humiliation had not been rejection. It had been theft. I did not answer him that morning. I told him I needed time, and he nodded and left. I spent the next several hours reading every page in that folder. My hands were steady. My mind was clear in a way it had not been in months. Grief does a strange thing to some people. It does not always break them. Sometimes it strips away everything soft and leaves only the part that knows how to endure. The documents were real. The inheritance clause was real. My grandmother's estate, which I had always been told was old furniture and a small savings account, was real and significant, tied directly to the company Conrad's family had built over 3 generations. The wedding had been a trap. On the second morning, Alexander knocked. I opened the door before he finished. "What are you proposing?" I asked. He said, "A second marriage. Strategic. Legal. Designed to protect your claim to the shares while we build a fraud case against Conrad's family." He paused. No romance promised. No false warmth. Only protection, resources, and a fair partnership. I looked at him for a moment. "Give me until tonight," I said. By the time the city lights came on outside the window, I already knew what my answer was going to be. That night, I sat on the cold tile floor of the suite bathroom with my back against the tub. I let everything arrive at once. The way you have to let a storm fully come before you can start counting the damage. I cried. Not the beautiful kind. The deep, ugly kind that comes from the part of your chest where you keep the things you never say. I cried for the wedding I had believed in. For the parents who locked their door. For the grandmother whose love I never knew the shape of. Then I stopped. I stood up. Looked in the mirror. Red eyes. Pale face. Jaw set. "You were not worthless," I said to my reflection. Out loud, so the words were real. For the first time since the ballroom, the feeling in my chest changed. The shame began to move, and something harder took its place. I picked up my phone. Found Alexander's number. Pressed call. He answered on the second ring. "Yes," I said. Just that one word. A brief silence on the other end. "I will send a car at 9 tomorrow morning," he said. I set the phone down and stood at the mirror a moment longer, looking at the woman who had just decided to stop waiting to be saved. The second wedding was nothing like the first. No ballroom. No flowers. No guests lifting champagne glasses and pretending to be happy for me. No photographer circling the room looking for the perfect shot. Just a small private office in a legal firm downtown. 2 witnesses I had never met. A justice of the peace who read the vows in a flat, professional voice, like she was reading a shopping list. And Alexander Laurent, standing beside me in a dark suit, calm and still as always. When it was done, he placed a ring on my finger. Simple. Silver. Nothing designed to impress. "This marriage will not humiliate you," he said, quietly enough that only I could hear. "That is the only promise I am making today, and I will keep it." It was not warm. It was not the love story I had once imagined when I was younger and still believed that good things simply happen to good people. But it was honest. And after everything I had lived through, honesty felt like the rarest and most valuable thing in the world. I signed the papers. I became Elena Laurent. For the first time in nearly 2 weeks, the ground beneath my feet felt solid. Not joyful, not comfortable, but solid. And right then, solid was enough. Alexander did not treat me like someone who needed protecting. He treated me like someone who needed to be equipped. The morning after our wedding, he introduced me to 3 people: his financial analyst, his media strategist, and his lead attorney. They sat around a long table with open laptops and stacks of printed documents, and they looked at me the way people look at someone they have been briefed about in advance. "We start with the basics," Alexander said. "How Conrad's family structured the inheritance clause. How they plan to use the marriage to access it. What it takes to prove fraud in court." The following weeks were the hardest kind of work. Not physical. Mental. I sat in that office every morning learning things I had never been taught. How silent shares function inside a family company. How financial fraud gets structured so it looks legal. How media narratives get built, and how they get dismantled. "You do not need revenge," Alexander told me one afternoon when I was staring at a page of legal language until my eyes blurred. "Revenge is emotional. What you need is leverage. Leverage is math." I wrote that down. I read it again the next morning. I was starting to understand the game Conrad's family played, and how to win it. 6 weeks after my second wedding, Conrad's company lost its biggest outside investor. I read about it over coffee. A short financial news item buried between 2 larger stories. The investor cited internal ethics concerns in his withdrawal letter, a letter that had somehow reached 3 different journalists at exactly the same time. Conrad's mother Vivian called an emergency board meeting that same afternoon, according to a source inside the company who reported to Alexander's team. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Nobody who attended it looked comfortable leaving. They did not know where the ethics leak had originated. They suspected a disgruntled employee. They suspected a competitor. They looked in a dozen directions. They never once looked toward a hotel suite where a woman in a ruined wedding dress had spent 2 days reading documents and making a decision. I watched the news coverage that evening from the living room of Alexander's estate. The anchor's voice was carefully neutral. The reporter outside the building chose her words with precision. I said nothing. I did not celebrate. I simply picked up my notepad, wrote down 3 new questions for the financial analyst, and went to bed. The game had rules. I was learning all of them. 3 months after the wedding, I walked into my first public event as Elena Vale. It was a charity gala at a museum downtown. Black tie. The kind of room filled with people who know exactly who everyone else is and watch each other from the corners of their eyes. I wore a midnight blue dress. Simple. Elegant. I walked in alone, shoulders back, chin level, and felt the shift in the room the way you feel air pressure change before a storm. The whispers started almost immediately. Phone screens angled in my direction. I was aware, without looking directly at any of them, of exactly where Conrad and Vivian were standing. Conrad saw me first. I watched him freeze from across the ballroom. His drink stopped halfway to his mouth. I did not avoid his gaze. I did not smile. I simply looked at him for 1 calm second, the way you look at something that used to frighten you, and then I nodded politely and looked away. Vivian was watching too. Her expression was not cruel anymore. She looked unsettled. Let her be unsettled, I thought. She had spent years making other people feel exactly that way. It was a new experience for her, and I had a feeling it was only going to get newer. Conrad found me near the edge of the room, away from the main crowd. I had positioned myself in a quiet corner specifically because I expected this. He came alone. No Vivian. No security. He looked like a man who had rehearsed a speech for weeks and just realized none of it would work the way he planned. "You planned this," he said. Low. Almost accusing. "No," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "You planned this." I simply responded. "You married Lauren to get back at me." "I married Lauren because you left me with $43 and a declined credit card." He stepped closer. "You know things you are not supposed to know." "I know what your mother did to my grandmother's estate," I said. "I know what the inheritance clause was built to do. I know what the wedding was actually for." Conrad went very still. His eyes changed. The arrogance that had lived there so comfortably shifted, and underneath it was something I had never seen on his face before. Fear. You underestimated me, I said. Most people do at first. I picked up my glass and walked back toward the center of the room, where the lights were bright and the cameras were rolling. I did not look back. 2 weeks after the gala, a formal financial investigation opened into Conrad's family company. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning. I was eating breakfast when Alexander set his phone down and said simply, "It has started." By afternoon, the news was everywhere. Investigators had flagged a pattern of financial discrepancies tied to inheritance transfers going back nearly 7 years. Documents were subpoenaed. External auditors were being brought in. Vivian's name appeared in a legal filing by the end of the week. She called me 3 times in 1 hour. I did not answer. She arrived at Alexander's estate unannounced on Thursday. The gate staff turned her away politely. She left a handwritten note, which was brought to me unopened. I unfolded it. It read, "You were nothing without us. You will regret this." I folded it carefully and placed it inside the folder I had been building since my first morning in Alexander's office. Every threat, every statement, every document. Organized, dated, and stored. Evidence does not care about your feelings. It simply exists. And the more of it you have, the more clearly it tells the truth. I added Vivian's note to the stack and closed the folder. Then I opened my laptop and went back to work. My parents came to the estate on a Saturday afternoon in early spring. I saw them on the security feed before they rang the bell. My father stood with his hands in his coat pockets, looking at the ground. My mother stood straighter, but her face was doing something I had not seen in years. She looked afraid. I told the gate staff to let them through. I met them at the front door without inviting them inside. My mother spoke first. "We made a mistake," she said, careful and measured the way she always was. "We were scared. The scandal moved so fast. We panicked." "You changed the locks," I said. "We were protecting ourselves." "I know." I let the silence sit. "You chose your reputation over your daughter. I am not going to pretend that did not happen." My father finally looked up. His eyes were wet. "Elena." "I am not angry anymore," I said, and I meant it. "But I am not the same person who sat on that porch. I need you to understand that." I did not slam the door. I told them I needed time. Some wounds take longer than one afternoon. The fact that they had come at all meant something. I just was not ready to say how much. The arrests happened on a Wednesday morning. I know the exact time because I was in the middle of a meeting with Alexander's legal team when one of the attorneys quietly excused herself from the table after receiving a call. She returned 2 minutes later and said simply, "It is happening." By noon, 3 senior financial officers from Conrad's company had been detained for questioning. By 2 o'clock, news vans were parked outside the family's main property. By 4, Vivian's name was trending on every financial news platform. Conrad called me 7 times that afternoon. I watched my phone light up on the table and let it ring every single time. At 6 o'clock, Alexander poured 2 glasses of water and sat across from me in his study. "How are you feeling?" he asked. It was the first time he had asked me that. Not what I thought about the strategy. Not what I wanted to do next. How I was feeling. "Strange," I said honestly. "Not the way I expected." He nodded like that made sense to him. "Watching something collapse is not always satisfying," he said, "even when it was wrong." I sat with that for a long time. He was right. The feeling in my chest was not triumph. It was something quieter and more complicated. A few weeks after the arrests, something between Alexander and me began to shift. I cannot point to the exact moment. It happened the way morning light comes into a room, so gradually that you cannot say when the darkness ended and the brightness began. We had started sharing meals more often. Not because the arrangement required it, but because we both kept ending up in the kitchen at the same time. We talked about things outside the case. Books. Cities at night. Small things. Real things. One evening, he told me something unexpected. "I noticed you 8 months before your wedding," he said. "At a fundraiser for a children's hospital. A junior staff member made a mistake with the event registration, and the committee head was furious with her in front of everyone." I remembered that evening. I remembered the young woman's face going pale. "You stepped between them," Alexander continued. "You took the blame yourself, then quietly fixed the problem. No one important was watching. You did it anyway." He paused. That was when I started paying attention. I looked at him across the dinner table. "So this was never truly random," I said. "No," he said. "It was not. It was the first moment our marriage felt less like a strategy and more like a choice." The public hearing was set for a Thursday in late April. I sat 3 rows back, dressed plainly, drawing no attention to myself. Alexander sat beside me. The evidence came out in pieces, methodical and relentless, the way a well-built case always does. Documents showing the inheritance clause and how it had been manipulated. Financial records tracing transfers tied to my grandmother's estate. Legal filings showing that Conrad's family had consulted attorneys specifically about how to use a marriage to exploit the clause. And then the wedding footage appeared on the courtroom screen. Millions had seen it online. But played in a courtroom with a legal analyst explaining each element that had been planned in advance, it became something entirely different. Not entertainment. Evidence. Gasps rose from the gallery when the analyst pointed out the timeline. The bank account had been revoked before Conrad even finished his speech. The security guards had received instructions before he stepped to the microphone. The whole thing had been scripted and timed. The room shifted in that moment. I could feel it. Not just journalists writing furiously in their notebooks, but ordinary people in the gallery who had come in believing one story. I had not been a gold digger. I had been a target. And now everyone in that room understood the difference. Vivian's formal charges were announced on a Friday afternoon. Fraud, conspiracy, coercion, financial manipulation tied to a protected estate. I was standing across the street from the courthouse when she came out. Her attorney was beside her. Cameras everywhere. For a moment, she composed herself the way she always had. Spine straight, chin up, expression controlled. She had spent decades practicing that look, and it still came naturally. Then she turned her head and saw me. I was not hiding. I had simply been walking back from a meeting nearby, and the timing had aligned by chance. We were 20 meters apart, looking directly at each other. Neither of us moved. I did not smirk. I did not raise my hand or say anything. I simply looked at her the way she had looked at me in that ballroom on my wedding night. Steady. Calm. Certain. The difference was that I was not calculating anything in that moment. I was not thinking about strategy or what came next. I was simply a woman who was still standing. Her composure cracked. Just slightly. Just for 1 second. But I saw it. Her attorney touched her arm and guided her to the waiting car. She looked away first. The hierarchy had reversed, quietly and completely, on an ordinary Friday afternoon. Conrad filed for retroactive annulment 3 weeks after his mother's charges. His attorney argued the marriage had been entered under false pretenses, that there had been no genuine intention of a real union, and that it should be treated legally as if it had never occurred. It backfired immediately. The legal review triggered by the annulment filing required an examination of all financial activity tied to Conrad's name during the period of our marriage. Investigators found 3 additional hidden transfers that had not surfaced in the original audit. 2 connected directly to Vivian's personal accounts. Conrad's remaining board members, those who had quietly stayed through the initial investigation, began resigning within 48 hours of the new findings going public. 1 on Tuesday morning. 2 more by Wednesday afternoon. The last holdout sent his letter on Thursday, citing irreconcilable concerns about leadership integrity. By Friday, Conrad had been removed from his own company by an emergency board committee. He called me twice that evening. I was in a meeting reviewing the upcoming share transfer process. I did not step out to answer. There was nothing left to say. The last piece of the structure his family had built was gone, and we both knew what that meant. Nothing I could have said would have changed how it ended. He came to the estate gate on a Sunday morning. I watched him on the security feed from the kitchen. He stood at the intercom for nearly a full minute before pressing the button. "Elena." His voice came through thin and strange. "Please. I just need to talk." I walked to the entrance hall and watched the feed. He looked smaller than I remembered. The certainty that always sat on him like expensive clothing was gone. "We can fix this," he said. "If you spoke to the board." "No," I said. "Elena, you loved me once." I thought about that honestly for a moment. "I loved who I thought you were," I said. "That person was not real. You built him for me to believe in." "I did believe in him. And then you took him away on purpose in front of 500 people, because it was useful to you." A long silence. "I wish you well," I said. "I mean that. But I cannot help you. The consequences you are facing belong to you." I nodded to the security staff. They opened the gate. He walked through. The gate closed behind him. I stood in the quiet hallway, listening to the sound of it closing, and felt the last weight I had been carrying finally set itself down. The board decision was finalized on a clear morning in early June. My grandmother's shares, the silent majority stake at the center of everything, transferred to me fully and legally. The fraud had been proven. The misconduct clause in her original estate documents had been triggered. Every layer of protection she had built had held. She had been smarter than all of them, and had just needed someone willing to fight long enough to prove it. Alexander's team arranged a press conference. I wore a simple gray suit. No notes. I stood at the podium and said what was true. My grandmother built something significant and protected it carefully, because she understood that powerful people sometimes take what does not belong to them. She was right. And for the past year, every person who tried to take what she left behind discovered that her protection was stronger than they believed. I paused. No one should be publicly destroyed for private gain. That is not justice, and it is not something we should accept as normal. The applause that followed was not polite or automatic. It was real. I stepped back from the podium, and for the first time in a very long time, I did not feel like I was waiting for something terrible to happen next. Vivian requested a private meeting 6 weeks after her sentencing. She had received a suspended sentence and substantial financial penalties. She had agreed to cooperate with the remaining civil proceedings. The arrogance that had made her seem untouchable for decades had cost her everything, and she knew it. The meeting took place in a small room at her attorney's office. No cameras. She sat across the table from me and looked like a woman who had finally run out of performances. "Please," she said quietly, "help my son find a way through this." I sat with those words. I thought about my grandmother, who had never met Vivian but had built a protection against exactly what Vivian had tried to do. I thought about the ballroom, the wedding dress, the cold porch steps, the $43, every humiliation, and every morning after that when I had gotten up and kept learning. "I forgive you," I said at last. Something in her face opened. "But I will not save you," I continued. "Or Conrad. The consequences of your choices belong to you. Forgiveness does not erase them." She nodded slowly. She did not argue. We left separately. I did not look back. Forgiveness, I had learned, is something you give for yourself. It has nothing to do with rescue. Months later, I stood in the same ballroom. The chandelier was the same. The marble floor. The shape of the windows. All of it exactly as I remembered. But the room was mine now. Alexander had helped me acquire the venue as part of a foundation I built over 4 months, designed to provide legal resources and support to women trapped in manipulative marriages, stripped of assets that were rightfully theirs. The event that evening was our first major fundraiser. The room was full, not with the same crowd as before. These were advocates, attorneys, journalists, survivors who had found their way through something impossible and come out with their names intact. Alexander stood beside me near the stage. Not in front of me. Not behind me. Beside me, the way equals stand. My parents sat quietly in the fourth row. We were still finding our way back to each other, slowly, the way broken things can sometimes be repaired when both sides are honest. I stepped to the microphone. The room settled. Nobody interrupted. My name is Elena Vale, I said. Those words felt completely true. Not a name I had survived into. Not a name given by someone else's plan. A name I had chosen. A life I had built. Mine.